Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
So today is going to be a different type of show. I'm going to be interviewing somebody. Who went bankrupt, basically, lost everything, basically, by what he calls the China hustle. Joel Kaplan is a private citizen and former investor who was defrauded in an investment business deal in China. He pursued justice in U.S. courts and obtained what he called worthless court judgments. Today, Joel is a resident of Jerusalem, Israel, and a dual Israeli and United States citizen. In 2011, Joel learned the hard way about the dangerous world of Chinese stock frauds. He responsibly invested in several green, clean tech companies. However, soon after, massive accounting fraud was discovered and exposed, not just in the companies he invested in, but in hundreds of companies operating in China. Companies that had obtained U.S. listings and seemed to have been vetted. In reality, though, these companies had fabricated their books and records in the CCCP. The discovery of these systemic and formulaic accounting frauds ultimately resulted to the delisting by NASDAQ and New York stock exchanges. Even after being sued, these companies didn't even bother to show up in court. So what did Joel and all of these investors actually experience and want to warn you about? It's called the China hustle, an ongoing systemic formulaic stock fraud that has already robbed American investors of more than $50 billion. We're going to be talking to him when we get back. Don't go anywhere. This should be an interesting show. And please support Israel News Talk Radio. Partner with us. You can donate on our homepage at israelnewstalkradio.com.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right. It is called the China hustle, an ongoing systemic formulaic stock fraud that has already robbed American investors of more than $50 billion. Our guest is Joel Kaplan. And unfortunately, Joel went bankrupt from his experience investing in China. And in this last year, after being interviewed by several high-level former U.S. government officials in the field of national security, Joel learned about the connect with the Chinese Communist Party, various companies with market listings on Wall Street, and get this, he says also the Biden family. He has been raising awareness about the ongoing China hustle stock fraud, current legislation in Congress, and, he says, the extent to which he believes the Biden family is involved, and he thinks most likely compromised. Joel Kaplan was interviewed on Glenn Beck's channel Blaze TV, and he wants you to know that United States court judgments in China are 100% worthless. He's here to share his story and to try to warn you not to lose your money through the China Hustle. You can check out his website at www.thechinahustle.us. And I want to say here that this is not against the Chinese people. This is a warning against doing dealings under a regime of the communist Chinese government. I'm not talking about the people. We're talking about the government. All right. Saying that, shalom, Joel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tamar. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been a fan for a long time, and hello to all of your audience.
So we hear and read in the news that there's been a lot of tension between America and communist China, especially lately. And quite frankly, standards and expectations are not the same on both sides of the ocean. One can get knockoffs from China, which are not the real deal, of substandard quality that Americans expect better of. And frankly, we get fakes from China all the time. And in the business and investment world, you and many other people have become victims to what you call the China Hustle, which apparently is another fake or knockoff. Tell us all about this.
Okay. Based, on what you just said, all of that is true, and that's all been going on, since the dawn of humanity. What's different here is that there's no recourse or remedy. And I'm going to come back to that at the end, because usually when there is an injustice, there's some sort of recourse or remedy. That's one of the things that's unique about this situation. So as you described very well, and folks, if you're at home or you're hearing this later on, you can research this in 5 minutes online. You can Google the China Hustle. There's a great movie to watch called The China Hustle, available on Amazon and Netflix. Lots of great attorneys, some of America's top attorneys and politicians speaking on that movie, The China Hustle. So as you mentioned, the China Hustle, there have been over 200 companies that the Securities and Exchange Commission has deregistered since 2008, which the Beijing Olympics was. And those companies total a market cap of over $100 billion. Now, much of that loss could have been in index funds. People realize that's just a general risk of the market. But there were entire companies that had market caps of over $100 million that just disappeared. And in many cases, about 50 cases, people went to court, United States courts, and won court judgments, and found out in the end that those court judgments were worthless. They weren't worth the paper they were printed on. So as you mentioned, this is a systemic, ongoing stock fraud. And it goes back to a piece of legislation called the Sarbanes-Oxley, after the Enron scandal, where they realized that big American companies were able to, through very complex accounting, create the picture that they wanted to create with their companies and basically create a veneer. And Sarbanes-Oxley was designed to pull that veneer off, and so people could see the honest and true accounting. Unfortunately, China doesn't have to follow that, and they're getting preferential treatment on our markets. So they're basically, initially, for many years, can run with a fabricated accounting sort of story. And then when that accounting gets discovered to be fabricated, there is a process that begins to happen where the companies move towards delistment from the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, and ultimately being deregistered by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And shareholders are basically left holding worthless stocks.
So if they're getting away with it, but yet you're saying that they're being delisted, explain that.
So once a company gets delisted from the NASDAQ, it drops to what are called the pink sheets. And when a company's on the pink sheets, they're no longer there's a it's kind of like what do you call it, a parole? It's like being grounded. They're no longer required to submit any accounting. So they can just trade on the pink sheets for years until at one point the SEC catches up with the thousands and thousands of companies that are trading on the pink sheets and they have about 6 months to explain why they haven't been submitting their accounting, and then they get deregistered, and then those stocks actually ultimately go to zero. So that's the difference between being delisted and then ultimately being deregistered.
Okay, and so how long has this been going on for?
So again, it's really in 15 years, 2005, there was this building of trust that we hear about between China and the United States. We're hearing now a lot of times in Congress, they're talking about, we all heard Joe Biden talk about, a rising China is a good thing for the world. So it's really been going on, for about 15 years during the Clinton days, when there was, with the New World Trade Organization, an invitation for Chinese companies to get listings in the U.S. market. So 2005 is when a lot of them came over, and some of them were very good companies, but systemically, more than a fair share got deregistered and delisted. And now people can clearly see that there's been no remedy for people like me. So there's no real reason for other people to get burnt, because when I invested, this was all hidden. Now it's all out in the open and exposed.
So these green companies that you invested in, companies that make, I imagine, solar heaters, things that are friendly to the environment, you thought that you're doing a good thing, and at the same time you're investing and you can put a place where you can make some money, and then everything was a sham, you're saying. Do these companies still exist?
In many cases, they disappear. Or, given now what's happened in 2020 with everything that's going on in the world, it's kind of crazy. But like what I'm doing right now is forbidden. A person can't really speak out against anything related to the Chinese Communist Party. Certainly, I couldn't go over to China I had planned to go over to China in 2020 to visit the electric bike company and the lithium-ion battery companies that I invested in. So it's only God knows is my answer to that question about whether or not these companies still exist. They certainly don't report. In some cases, they moved their facilities after, shareholders were interested to find out what happened to their investments. They just either sell the assets of the company and move somewhere else. I can say for the company I invested in, which was called Advanced Battery Technologies, they had 3 large campuses in Dongguan, Wuxi, and Harbin. Those companies have disappeared. And one of them was an $85 million battery factory that I traveled through. They offered shareholders a walk-in, and I have videos. That company was in Dongguan, China. All the machinery in that company has disappeared as far as I know. And it would be dangerous for me to actually go to China now to actually see what I invested in. It's shocking.
Okay, now you took this to court with other people as well. Is that correct?
Yes, with the company that I invested in, Advanced Battery Technologies, and folks can Wikipedia that. It started off as a class action in New York, and then ultimately that was a remedy that was worthless, and we went to another court where the company had incorporated in Delaware, and we did win in 2016 a fair court judgment. That court valued our shares at $27 per share based on what the company had been submitting. Since the company disappeared, the court just basically said, okay, this is what you say you're worth, so this is what the shareholders should be paid. And they turn it over to a U.S. court-appointed receiver, his firm has about 25 of these cases, and he's appointed and empowered to go to China to negotiate with the Chinese government, the Chamber of Commerce, the CEOs, and after 3 years, he got absolutely nowhere. They offered him fractions of pennies on that $27 a share, and it didn't really even pay for our legal bills. Basically, they said, take it or leave it.
So you won the court case, but you couldn't collect, and whatever you did get, pennies on the dollar, you couldn't even pay the court costs.
Right. In this case, this electric bike company had raised $100 million. When a company gets a listing on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, they're basically allowed to sell shares of their stock and raise capital, which should be based on true and fair accounting for the good of the company. However, if it's discovered that they've submitted fabricated accounting, then they go through this whole process. But that money is already in China.
Okay, hold it right there, Joel. We have to take a break. We're going to be right back, and I'm going to be asking Joel also what he believes Joe Biden or the Biden family had to do with anything. We're going to be right back.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're talking about the China hustle, and our guest is Joel Kaplan. And you can go and visit his website, www.thechinahustle.us. Joel invested in green type of companies, friendly to the environment, in China. However, unfortunately, there was stock fraud that was going on, and he lost a lot of money, as did many other American citizens who invested in there, or I guess I should say anybody who invested in there. And he's here telling us his story on how he basically went bankrupt and exactly what happened. And Joel, in the last segment, I was asking you about the court case. They were sued. They did lose. However, the judgment that the judge gave, you were only able to collect pennies on the dollar, which you said didn't even pay the court fees that you had to put out. And I'd like to ask you now, so how does this money scheme work? Who's got the money? And you were saying that you believe that the Biden family, who the news talks about all these connections between the Biden family and China and suspicions of what's going on there, interests, etc. Where would you like to take us on that?
Well, look, I know you have one listener who wrote about the ethics of even investing in China. So I just want to just address that quickly. The person that wrote in saying, should we even be investing in a country that has these ethical problems with labor issues? That listener is absolutely right. I was very naive when I began with this back in 2011. I had an image of China, honorable society, and a lot of the people that speak about China, they speak about the great qualities of the Chinese people. And I saw that myself, incredibly hardworking, living on campuses, away from their families, and generally happy, seemingly. But we're much more aware now of how unethical a lot of this labor is. And I was naive, and I see the point that your listener is making, that this is karma. So that listener is absolutely right. And so I would just suggest that people think about not just the financials of where you're putting your money, but what's going on overall in China with the slave labor market. That being said, the money is, once that money gets into the hands and the bank accounts of the CEOs in China, and many of them, if not all of them, are connected in some way, shape, or form with the Chinese Communist Party, that money is in their bank accounts and to do with what they want to do. In the case of an American CEO, Canadian, European CEO, that person could be arrested. They could have their accounts frozen. They could have their assets frozen. They could have inventory in their warehouse frozen. That's all impossible to do in China. So there's really no leverage. And that's part of the big problem, is that they're getting enormous preferential treatment in our capital markets, and they're protected from any type of consequence or punishment. Not one CEO has gone to jail, and not one United States court judgment has been paid with any sense of equity. We're hearing now about the equitable, that's a coin of the new administration. Well, there is not any sense of fairness or equitableness in terms of the China hustle. So that money basically goes into the bank accounts of the CEOs, and only the Almighty knows what is happening with it.
All right. Now, you mentioned the Biden family and their connections with China. Where do you think, how does this intersect?
Okay. So if your listeners just even want to Google Joe Biden and the China hustle, many articles will come up about what happened. But one in particular is by a investigative journalist named John Solomon. The headline of the article is "China is cheating on Obama-era stock market deal." And this was written during the Trump administration. Trump urged to intervene. So this article was written about 6 months ago. There was a Chinese company called Luckin's Coffee, and it was discovered that they had overstated their revenues by $300 million. When that fraud was discovered, that company actually just filed for bankruptcy a few days ago. When that stock was discovered, the loss in market cap was more than $1 billion on one company. I think it was about $3.5 billion. So this, if people Google Joe Biden and the China hustle, this article by John Solomon will come up, and they can see this little noticed memorandum of understanding that was done in 2013 that would ensure that China could basically get a free pass when it came to not having PCAOB oversight on their companies. Now, as outrageous as it is, there are some people in Congress that have been working on this, and recently 2 bills passed. One is Senate Bill 945, Senate Bill 945. The other is House Bill 7000. And these are designed to protect foreign investors. U.S. investors in foreign companies. However, as written, these 2 laws give China 3 more years to go by this memorandum of understanding that was signed during the Obama and Biden administration, which I'll read a few sentences of, that allow China to get this preferential treatment on the markets. So these 2 bills really are there, and they passed both houses, but they have no teeth.
So you're going to read something?
Yeah, it's just taking a few minutes to come up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's move on until it comes up.
All right. Okay. And so what now, I imagine that when Trump was president, that things were tightened a bit. Things were the law was more scrupulous on looking at China, seeing what they're doing, or was it ignored then too?
Well, in the last few months of the Trump administration, there were several companies that were put on a watch list. There were several companies that were delisted, and there are very big forces here. And things went back and forth a few times about whether those companies would be delisted or whether or not it was just a warning signal. So it seemed like nothing drastic was done, but there was buzz in the news that something would be done, and it sort of put many of these companies on notice. And I would say that's still where it's at right now. It's like the hammer could fall, and these companies they're certainly being inspected a little bit more. At any point, they could be delisted, and the Trump administration did put out a warning. And on the SEC.gov website, there is a warning about the risks of investing in Chinese companies. That risk, those warnings weren't there when I started investing back in 2011, 2012. So part of my, being able to talk to you and your audience is to really warn people that this whole thing could collapse. Now, there's an easy fix. China could Senator Kennedy, when they were passing Senate Bill 945, made a great speech in front of Congress. And in his southerly way, he said, all we want you to do is follow our rules. That's it. Just follow the rules. We have rules. We have laws. If they choose not to follow them, there will be consequences. The same as there was for me to have these consequences of investing, in companies where there were, no rule of law. And people should know that there's really no rule of law. So I did this memorandum of understanding did come up.
How much money did you lose?
Oh, it's tragic. Because I threw good money after bad, and then I paid lawyers. Altogether, I lost close to $500,000, and my court judgment was for over $2 million, and I would have been happy with 10% of that judgment. But I lost over $500,000. It was 10 years of my life savings, because once in my case, the company kept writing letters. The CEO of the company kept writing letters through 2013, 2014. In actuality, they were running from the law, but they kept claiming in the letters, and this is all up on my website, that they were going to resume following the law as soon as the market conditions got, a little kinder. Mm-hmm. And it was basically like a child running from his parents. I didn't do anything. It's not me, someone else. And it was a very childlike type of behavior. And in the end, they disappeared. So during that time, I continued to have trust in the company. I actually was invited over. I had a special visa to, see that their operations were continuing during 2013 and 14, when they were in that kind of no man's land, that they were in the delisted stage on the pink sheets, but they hadn't yet been deregistered. And I went back to visit the company to see that the electric bikes were still coming off the assembly line. And then at some point in 2015, it just completely disappeared.
And so again, state now, with Joe Biden being the president of the United States now, how does that?
Right. So this memorandum of understanding is interesting. Joe Biden, maybe he could decide to be tough and say, look, it's win-win. We talked at the beginning of the interview about fairness and justice. And some of your listeners might be Hebrew and know the Hebrew word for shalom, is the same as to pay. L'shalem comes from the same root as the word peace. And when there's fairness and equity between two parties that have a dispute, peace can be restored. Now, giving Joe Biden the benefit of the doubt, he says he wants to bring unity. Maybe they all told have probably $5 billion in court judgments to pay, compared to the trillions of dollars of market cap that are trading on the market. One would think, what's it called, a havamina? One would think that this should be able to sit down and say, okay, pay on these United States court judgments, follow the rules, and this can become a win-win situation. And of course, what your writer wrote about fairness for the hardworking Chinese people that are worked with, they call Lao Beijing.
Okay, hang on right there. I'm sorry, Joel. We have to. Sure. You have a hard break coming up right now. We're going to be right back.
Very good.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany is but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
All right, we're talking about the China Hustle. You can go to the website www.thechinahustle.us, and our guest is Joel Kaplan. He's talking about how he basically was bankrupted by his investing in certain companies on the stock market in China. And he's trying to warn us about what he went through and what we need to be careful about. And Joel, just in this last segment, I want to make clear again, I want to understand if you can just sum up again what you believe about the dealings of the Biden family in China, in communist China.
Sure. I would also commend your listeners to, again, Google Joe Biden and the China hustle and read the article by the Federalist. So we're very well known now that Hunter Biden, God bless his soul with his new life, was accompanied his father to China during the Obama-Biden administration. And out of that trip, he was able to secure $1 billion for a hedge fund from the Bank of China. Many experts said that that's nearly impossible. A lot of this should have been brought up leading up to the election and during the debates. But given what was going on with Corona, it never really came to light. So people now can go and research it after the fact. And this was missing from the public discourse. But it's very clear that Joe Biden has to come 100% clean on what his relationship was and his family's relationship with the Chinese Communist Party and the Bank of China and the financial institutions that were involved. We know just a few days ago, Hunter Biden got a $2 million book deal, and maybe he'll discuss that in the book. But it's very clear that China did not pay on their United States court judgments, but seemed to have plenty of money to what's called influence peddling with the Bidens when he was in office. So maybe we can circle back to that. But did you have another question?
Well, I want you in this last segment to basically sum up as well what can we do about it? And also if you can, I mean, in your opinion, are there any businesses at all that are quote unquote kosher to invest in communist China today? Is it are they all the same, or is it just certain companies? Tell our listeners.
Well, it's very hard to know because they bundle them all together in these index packages, and some of them probably do have legitimate accounting, but as a whole, their government hasn't done enough to make sure that people can differentiate between what's a real company, what's not a real company. They certainly could do that, and they benefit from that because they're able to raise biblical amounts of capital in. If 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 of these companies are fraudulent and they're able to pull in an extra $10 or $15 billion, who knows? And that's part of the racket, that they're running is to bundle that in. So look, these two bills, Senate Bill 945 and House Bill 7000, until they have a theft tax and a victim compensation fund, and until there's some sense that if there is a United States court judgment, that they will be paid. Anybody who invests in China is putting all of their capital at risk. At any time, Alibaba could be cut in half. It just happened with Luckin's Coffee. It was a company that had a $5 billion market cap. Poof, it's gone. The company I invested in, poof, it's gone. But somehow, Hunter Biden was able to get more than $1 billion for in a private equity deal. It's so unjust and unfair that it shocks people's consciousness what's going on. So those sweetheart deals have to end, and until they do, people are putting their hard-earned money at risk. I hope Joe Biden will bring this up in his meetings.
But you don't expect it.
Well, if enough people, if enough people say something and are tough, like we have this, person who's very inflamed by what I'm saying right now, writing in on the chat room. This is an emotional topic. It's a hot topic. And there's something that causes people to back down. Like, we know Joe Biden just took Churchill out of the Oval Office. If people don't confront the truth and say, I demand the truth, I deserve the truth, I want the truth, it's good for you and it's good for me if everything is on the table. If people don't do that, then we can just expect to continue to get walked on. So,
well, I mean, in addition to that, if you're the president of the United States or if you're anybody that has anything to do with the justice system, you want to bring justice for your own citizens. You don't want to see crime. You don't want to see people running off with other people's money. You want to have a world with law and order. However, there are other people who don't care about law and order as long as their bank accounts are growing from this.
That's absolutely, and that's what's so brazen about these frauds is that they, instead of doing the ethical right thing, they use bribery. And we know the dangers of bribery. It's the beginning of a vice, and it's the downfall of the structure of a culture. So a lot of it hinges on the money. People follow the money, and people can read the filings that I've made with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and even I made filings against the Bidens because I wanted to bring this to the attention of the world.
Well, what filings did you make against the Biden family?
Oh, well, when I realized I was waiting year after year after year to get paid on my court judgment, and every time I talked to the attorney in New York, it would be another 3 months, another 3 months. And then they signed a pittance of an agreement, and it took them still another year to even pay on that pittance of the agreement. And Hunter Biden was able to waltz into China with his father. I was shocked. And when this news broke in late 2019, a few months before the corona, I did an amici brief, I might be pronouncing that wrong, friend of the court, to show this one judge that was involved in one of Hunter Biden's domestic affairs all of the United States court judgments that had not yet been paid. There were about 25 that I had on my laptop. And so those are all in the filings. It's all on my website, thechinahustle.us. I do try to support other victims. I'm not the only victim. I've had people in their 80s, retirees, who also won court judgments, who were completely wiped out. They lost their pension funds, all the inheritance they wanted to leave their family. So it was shocking and appalling to me that Hunter Biden was able to go in there and get this deal. And when his father should have been representing defrauded investors, was basically just serving his family. So those are all in the filings. It was a gross travesty of justice, and I felt it was important to tell the world.
And what about these other people who lost their money? I mean, certainly you're not the only person that's fighting this and that lost and that's trying to, seek justice and warn people. What about the others?
So coming back to the movie, this movie also was produced by Mark Cuban. So Mark Cuban, if you hear this,
name the title of the movie again for our listeners.
The name of the movie is The China Hustle, available on Netflix and Amazon. Mark Cuban, multi-billionaire, produced the movie. And he interviewed, in that movie, there were about 4 or 5 other people that lost their shirts like me. Over the years, I've had about 25, 30 people contact me. Well, actually, no, more in the hundreds. And I have a list of all those people. But there are a few very, very sad stories. Some of those were in the movie. And again, I would ask Mark Cuban and some of the people involved in the movie why they haven't set up a victim compensation fund either. They're profiting off of people being victims. So these are very sad stories. And a lot of these people, it's too late for them. They're already in their 80s and they were tricked. So this is a shout out and a word of caution.
All right, Joel. And in the last 3 minutes that we have, maybe share with us what you want to leave us with. In other words, maybe I didn't ask you something. Maybe there's something on your chest that you feel all of us need to know to warn us. What would you like to leave us with in these last 3 minutes?
Thanks, Tamar. My loss with this was absolutely heartbreaking and life-changing. And I can't really do anything about it. If I could go back in time, I really wish I could. We always say, if I knew what in my 20s, what I know now, I just want, especially, your listeners to understand that biblical fraud does happen in this world. It has happened. It happened to me. And this isn't, like you said at the beginning, this is an ongoing systemic formulaic fraud. If people want to read the verses in the Bible from Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 31, all about Jacob and Lavan, this type of trickery and deceit has been going on, since the dawn of humanity. But in this case, there has not yet been justice. And so if you're jumping into these investment waters, you have to understand that you could lose it all like I did. And my prayer is, and what I hope to do is prevent, it says we have a book called Ethics of the Ancestors. Let the money of your fellow brother and sister be as dear to you as your own. And so by doing this, I hope I'm fulfilling one of God's commandments. please don't put your money at risk. There are many patriotic investments you can do. There are investments in countries that we have a treaty with. But what we have now with this 2000 Memorandum of Understanding is that basically China has a free pass to lie, cheat, and steal. And while these two bills that just passed in Congress, address the issue, they still give China 3 more years to lie, cheat, and steal with no accountability and no consequence. So I just hope that your listeners, if you're a grandparent or a parent listening to this, that you'll share this interview. If you're listening to this, months down the road, that you'll pass this interview on to people that you know and care about, and also to your congressional representatives, that something needs to be done for the good of China and their raising capital in our capital markets, and for the integrity of our capital markets, and really, when it comes down to it, to the integrity of our world. I invite people again to go to the ChinaHustle.us. I'll be posting up a lot of these documents there so that you can read them for yourselves, do 15 minutes of research. That we always say people need to do due diligence, and make this part of your due diligence before you put a penny into Chinese Communist China.
Right. We all have to be careful. And, Joel, the next investment you make it in Israel, not in communist China.
I wish I had done that before. And I see these electric bikes every day, and I think I picked the right product. I just picked the wrong country.
So your next product should be property in Israel. Buy yourself an apartment. You'll be getting maybe $1,000 a month in rent every month in your pocket. Plus you have something real, not just paper fiat stocks. So, everybody, think about buying property in Israel, buying an apartment. You can contact me. I'll be happy to speak with you. Thank you, Joel, very, very much for coming on the show. I hope that people heard this.
I do have a fund for victims on that website. So if you're feeling like in a generous mood, please help out.
All right. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.